Tom, today with another exciting episode for you, and I find myself today sitting on a tractor here in the middle of Vermont, a place that I'd never probably thought I'd visit in my life, being from the West Coast, growing up and raised in California. Here in the middle of Vermont, first time in this great state, and it is beautiful here. I've been missing a lot, just staying in the West Coast and not ever coming out to this part of the country. But the reason why I'm here today is a very important reason. Where I'm sitting on a tractor, and I'm sitting on 30 acres, and this property was basically started to get farmed 30 years ago by the current homeowners that are growing food here. And 30 years ago, this was nothing but grass. So everything you see here was a field. They built a barn that's also a house and a shop, and they, put in, fruit trees and a vegetable garden. And, they're just working people too, like you and me. They got regular jobs, regular day jobs, and their garden, they set it up properly, and they're growing food successfully. So this family is depending on this one locally sourced, nutrient that's probably one of the most nutritious, best fertilizers you can add to your garden, which should be a foundation of your garden as it is here. And they're kind of taking it to the extreme. They haven't imported or used any soluble nitrogen, and have only put down, things like the compost and, composted materials for nitrogen, in addition to these minerals that they're adding. And they're having some amazing growth here, which kind of proves, in my opinion, standard agriculture wrong when you go down and you have to buy 10-10-10 fertilizer, and we're focused on 3 main minerals. Like, they're really not adding in any significant amounts those 3 minerals that most people say you need. And so let's go ahead into the garden and show you guys some of the growth, some of the things they're growing, and then actually at the end of this episode, we're going to actually introduce you to the gardener here, but also one of the first and foremost rock dust advocates in the entire country. His name is Tom. So anyways, let's check out Tom's gardens first. So here on the property, you guys can see they have a nice grassy area. They got kids, so the kids could play, and it just creates a nice open space. And all this grass, they don't spread down like, fertilizer or anything like that. They just put rock dust on here. And look at how green this is here in Vermont. And, they don't water this stuff. They let the natural rain come. And this season has been a hard growing season for them, as they explained. And, no matter where you live, you may have hard times growing things because of the climate is quite erratic during these times of climate change, because, it's too hot, too cold, it rains too much, the ground gets drenched, and it doesn't get too much water. And so, one of the things I like about the trace minerals they're using, the rock dust, it really gives you some more extra buffer. So it gives you, like, I actually had, just the other day, I had one of my viewers come up to me and said, "Hey John, we're growing some tomatoes in the middle of the country, and it's been a horrible year for tomatoes for everybody around us, and all the farmers, they don't have any tomatoes, but we got bumper crops of tomatoes like nothing's going on." And he's like, I'm like, "Well, what are you doing?" He's like, "Well, we're using the rock dust like you said." And so, he's getting better results. And now, is that because of the rock dust? I don't know. Is they doing something else special? Are they blessing the plants? Are they putting some magic spell on it? I don't know. But, I think the rock dust can only be beneficial and help you guys to be more resilient against the weather, and also, more importantly, grow higher quality, more nutritious food, that, well, we're going to show you guys that's been proven. And so this is the garden here, and they have different raised beds, or kind of like, mounded up beds, not really raised up. And they have a nice, really rich bed of the basil here. And they're growing a lot of, besides just the food crops, they're growing a lot of medicinal crops that I've learned about, like the mullein and the mugwort, and they got some comfrey and all kinds of cool stuff. They got catnip. But what I want to show you guys next, actually, is the tomatoes, because one of the things that they really believe in here is doing experimentation. And that's what I believe in too. I believe you guys should always experiment, not only in the bedroom, but also in your garden, to do different things. This year they did an experiment with growing tomatoes. So over in this area, they grew some tomatoes like these guys, and you guys could see, these plants are not very huge, but yet they're loaded up with all these tomatoes that will soon be ripening. So in this area, they planted the tomatoes, at the appropriate time for this climate zone. And then actually they, of course, added the rock dust, and then they mulched. So then these tomatoes are really nice, stout plants that are growing really well. And then over yonder, let's go over here real quick. These tomatoes actually were planted a little bit later and not mulched. And because it was so dry, you know, the water was not being retained in the soil, and these plants just did not fare as well and are as large or productive. So, you know, so that's cool that they're doing experiments, and they've been experimenting now with rock dust for 30 years and using it to see how it grows so that they could educate others about, you know, the possibilities and how to use rock dust in the best and most efficient way. One of the coolest things here is, you know, I really like the rock dust, and some of the largest leaves that I've ever seen in my life, you know, for vegetable wise, was actually at my friend's place in Portland. The video is titled, which you guys should watch if you haven't, it's titled Supersize Your Vegetables with Wood Chips and Rock Dust. So while they do use some wood chips here, I think they should personally use some more, but they are using the rock dust. And I had a dinosaur kale leaf, which are usually long and slender, and I picked one at my friend's place in Portland, and it covered my head. And here they're growing one of my other kind of favorite kales besides the dinosaur kale. It's actually the red Russian kale. And these guys are pretty large, and they just about cover my head. Peekaboo, I see you. So yeah, I mean, so this is what can happen when you're using rock dust. I mean, their tomatoes are nice and large, juicy, sweet, and delicious. Not only will the rock dust make your leaves larger, they're gonna make them, you know, more disease and pest resistant. They're gonna make them more nutritious, and they're gonna make them more tolerable to, you know, the elements and to different weather and climatic conditions. So yeah, that's a really cool thing about the garden. They're just pretty much adding rock dust and other minerals, and, you know, of course, some compost in addition. I think, you know, most gardeners get it somewhat backwards. You know, everybody thinks compost, compost, compost. If I add compost, make my own compost, that's all I need. But the problem is, if there's not the trace minerals, especially in the compost you're making, then your soils are going to be deficient. They're only going to have what was in there originally, and if food and the material that you're using to make compost, whether that's from manure source or tree scraps and yard waste clippings, if that wasn't grown with the trace minerals, then your compost will not have those trace minerals, and then subsequently your plants will not have those minerals as well. So besides just the plants, they also have some animals on the site. So next, let me go ahead and show you guys how they're using the rock dust as well as biochar to feed their animals to increase their animals' health and consequently their health when they eat the eggs or byproducts of the animals. Chicken, chicken. You know what's for dinner? All right, so anyways, as you guys can see, we got some chickens here, and these are truly free-range chickens. They just, you know, stay in the cage at night for protection from, you know, different animals and whatnot. But in the daytime, they just get to wander around and they get to eat and forage for their own food here. And one of the things that they're feeding the chickens are actually the biochar and the rock dust. So I've heard of feeding rock dust to animals. I mean, this is really good for the animals because they're getting their trace minerals, which are essential to them. And, you know, although I would like to grow, you know, vegetables and things for my chickens that have the rock dust, you could also feed it to them directly, as we can also directly ingest rock dust for our trace minerals, but the absorption is very low. But some minerals are always better than no minerals, in my opinion. But the best way is to get it, you know, run the trace minerals, you know, in the inorganic state through your plants, and then get them in the minerals in an organic state that we can better assimilate and digest once they've been, you know, consumed literally by the plants. Now, one of the cool things I learned about this time, you know, with the chickens, let me see if I could catch a chicken. No. So basically what I found out this trip is by actually including biochar in your animals' diets, it's going to minimize the amount of gas, for example, or flatulence, or toxic byproducts they create, because the charcoal will bind it up instead of, you know, animals such as cows releasing it into the atmosphere, which can be a major issue in this day and age, you know, that may be playing a significant factor in the climate change that's going on. So yeah, I just wanted to give you a little quick synopsis of biochar and rock dust with animals, something new I learned. But now I want to really go off into the coolest part of the farm, which is the field where they're growing a lot of different fruit trees. So now we're in the fruit tree orchard, and as you guys can see, we got apple trees. And I mean, the amazing thing for me is that these apple trees are actually quite productive, being that they're actually not even adding any, fertilizer in a bag or anything like this. There's not using like fruit tree fertilizer, apple tree fertilizer, citrus tree fertilizer, or anything like that. They're simply like, heavily mulching with wood chips underneath the trees, and then they also add the rock dust. So I want to take you guys over here, and look at the production on this tree. I haven't seen production like this in quite a long time. If we look at this, normally these apples will be thinned out because this is just way too many apples for one tree, and normally they might have branches breaking that they'd have to prop up and do all this stuff. But the amazing thing is, by using the rock dust minerals, they got like large harvests, a lot of fruit, plus the branches are nice and strong because one of the major elements in the rock dust is something like the silica. Like, we have bones that are made of calcium. The trees and the plants and all this stuff, they need this silica, very important, to build strong branches and healthy branches. And because these apples start growing a little bit at a time and getting heavier, that puts excess demand on the limbs to grow stronger. Much like if I work out my muscles and I'm lifting weights, I'll build muscles, right? And this is what the tree does. But the tree can only build strong limbs if it has all the right trace minerals and the soil's, nutritious. So without using any kind of chemical, synthetic, water-soluble nitrogen like most farmers do, they're simply using rock dust and other mineral sprays to get this amazing bounties of apples. Look at all these guys. They have so many apples here that the majority of them actually just get pressed out. They make apple juice, which then they freeze, and then they'll, drink throughout the year. And I can say that I had some of the apple juice, and don't tell anybody, I had a little bit of their hard apple cider last night too, and it was delicious. And it was some of the best apple juice I've ever tasted. Because the other thing, besides the tree being healthier because of these trace minerals, and besides yielding more, besides being more bug and disease resistant, I'm not going to say they don't have any challenges with insects or anything like that, but overall it's going to be healthier. We get to eat the apples, and then we're going to be healthy because now we're going to get the trace minerals that were not normally, occurring in the soil. And also, everything's going to taste better. It's going to taste sweeter because many people know that we have sugar receptors on our tongue, that we love things that are sweet. Unfortunately, most people are eating the wrong kinds of sugars, like refined sugars and processed sugars. We also have salt receptors on our tongue. So when we eat things that are salty, wow, that's good. So, people dump tons of salt, and most Americans eat far too much sodium or salt in their diet. So I don't recommend that either, and I don't recommend the refined sugars. I recommend natural sugars as found in fruits in a balance that nature would provide naturally. But we also have trace mineral receptors on our tongue, and these are the receptors, in my opinion, that are not being activated. So when I really eat, high quality fruit with all the different trace minerals, it lights up these receptors, whether they're the sugar receptors, whether the salt receptors, or the other mineral receptors. It's like, oh my God, it's almost like an orgasm in your mouth, and you're like, oh my God, this is like the best kale ever, like I was just snacking on the way down to film this video. But yeah, really good apple juice they got here. All right, so here's yet another apple that they have in their orchard growing. As you guys can see, this tree, it's also loaded up with tons of apples. Now, one of the things I want to recommend to you guys, if you do have fruit trees, and I do encourage you guys to have fruit trees, especially if you have a lot of acreage and space to plant fruit trees, plant as many fruit trees as you possibly can. And my tips would be to, for your nutrients, for your trees, rock dust and wood chips. Keep feeding your trees rock dust and wood chips, as well as other, sprays to spray on minerals and other things on the leaves, like these biostimulants that actually we're going to talk about in a minute. And your trees are going to be super healthy, super productive, and yield lots of food for you. So what I would like to do for you guys next is actually, we'll maybe show you guys a little bit more of this tree. But actually, we're going to walk up to the open area over there, and we're going to go ahead and talk with Tom Vanacore, and this is his beautiful garden and orchard that I got to show you briefly. And the reason really why I came here, besides to show you guys some cool stuff growing and how well it's doing, is because Tom is probably the #1 rock dust advocate and researcher and knowledgeable person about rock dust, and who sources the most rock dust of anyone, that I'm aware of, he has like rock dust connections all over and can get you the best kind of rock dust. And I know there's videos online that say rock dust is not that good. I did a test in my garden, it didn't work, and all this kind of stuff. And we're gonna find out why sometimes rock dust actually may not work. All right, so here we are. So this is Tom Vanacore, and how's it going, Tom?
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me out. All right, Tom, so I have a lot of questions for you today because I know you're like the rock dust expert here, and you're probably one of the biggest experts I've had on this subject because you've been playing with rock dust now for the last 30 years. I mean, how did you get into all this rock dust stuff and know so much about this?
Well, you have to understand that I worked in the trades all my life as a mason, a stone mason and a stone cutter. So I was working with rocks, different types of geologic materials in the trades, and I had an interest in both that and also growing food, because here in Vermont we raise our own food to the extent we can. So I started combining those interests, and one thing led to another, and that was many years ago.
Wow, yeah, I mean, he has some amazing carvings and stonework around the property here. But, I know since then, you've been a lot into rock dust, and actually you started a company, rockdustlocal.com, and tell us what rockdustlocal.com does.
Well, Rock Dust Local is the first company in North America that specializes in sourcing regional rock dust for remineralization primarily. So what we do is, and we have for the last 25 years, is look to identify good sources of agro-minerals or agricultural minerals in the form of pulverized or crushed rock, and we work to identify those sources, do analysis of them to figure out if they're suitable for agricultural use, and then at that point figure out the logistics of getting those materials to professional growers, or of late we've put these things into packages so that avid gardeners and people of interest in growing in their backyard could have access to these materials, and we ship out of a warehouse that we maintain in Massachusetts for that purpose. So the Rock Dust Local is about regional sourcing of rock dust for remineralization. That's it in a nutshell.
Cool. So no matter where you live, while Tom is here in the Vermont and northeastern United States, he has, people he works with all over the country, from Oregon, California, Wisconsin, all over. So no matter where you live, there is likely a local source of rock dust for you, so that it doesn't have to be shipped as far if you're ordering in large, tote quantities or truckload quantities if you're have acreage or a large farm. So yeah, that's how he's been involved with this, and he's researched and worked with many different universities and things to provide them products to get the results with the rock dust. So next time I want to go ahead and talk about different kinds of rock dust with you, because I see back here we have all these different jars, and I mean, this is rock dust haven. I went crazy when I got here, and Tom showed me his shop, and he has these are just a fraction. He has at least over 100 different samples of different kinds of rock dust. He has more rock dust and minerals than anybody I've ever met in the world, and these are just a sampling of different kinds of ground up rocks. And what's the difference between these, and are some better than others for agriculture use, and can somebody use some quote-unquote rock dust and get little or poor results?
Oh, sure. Every type of geologic material, every kind of rock dust will be different depending upon the source and the parent material, how the rock was formed, what kind of environment formed the rock. So as an example, some rock dust will be volcanic in origin, some will be magmas, which is basically the molten under the mantle of the earth. There's molten core that comes up through. You'll have rocks that have come out of the earth in the form of lavas. You'll have glacial rock dust, which will be rock dust that are derived from basically sediments or mixed up of all different sorts of types of rock. You'll have rock dust which are shales, which are basically laid down in sediments and formed into large beds. Sandstones, which are agglomeration of silica sand and other types of smaller rock into larger rock forms. So you'll also have some of the most well-known rock dust would be lime, your agricultural limes, which are carbonate, calcium carbonate limes, magnesium carbonate. So these will all be derived from seashells and other maritime creatures that were laid down in sediments and formed into these large beds of stone over many millions of years. So as in every rock dust will be different. Also, the type of use that a grower might find for the rock dust will be different, and depending upon what they're using it for, that will determine not only the rock dust type, but also the gradation. In other words, the particle size. What's the most ideal particle size for that particular use? And that's what we concentrate on, the type of the rock and what sorts of particle size for the particular application. We'll look at soil samples. We'll look at what the crops are growing, what kind of crops they're growing. We'll look at whether they're just avid gardeners or whether they're professionals growing indoors or out. And then we'll start making choices on what's their nearest best rock dust and see if we can't get them rock dust at reasonable prices.
Cool. Yeah, so I mean, I want to really differentiate here because there are so many different kinds of rock dust. You can get some, lime or gypsum, which could also be, a mined rock. But when I talk about rock dust and say rock dust, the term, what I specifically mean is a rock dust from rock that actually has a wide spectrum of trace minerals. This is really what I mean. So I really want you guys to get the rock dust with wide spectrum of trace minerals and not just a specific rock, that's ground up for specific reasons like increasing, decreasing pH, or whatever. So you want to talk to this fact, Tom, on this, because so many people get confused. They just think they could get any kind of ground up rock and it's going to be the same as what I talk about.
Sure. We talk about the best rock dust, and best meaning broad elemental spectrum tectonic, and the last word tectonic means forces that shape the earth. So when I mean the best rock dust, I'm talking about a rock dust that come from geology that has a very broad spectrum of macro and micronutrients, everything from the major elements, your calcium and magnesium, those sorts of elements, all the way to the micronutrient traces such as boron or molybdenum, zinc, nickel, things that you don't really hear about but are essential for high functioning plant life and also human functionality in your own system, your biologic system. So the best rock dust for remineralization are going to be those broad spectrum rock dust, such as the basalt. That would be a gold standard for rock dust, proven. There are other types of rock dust out there, but we go for those type of rocks that are volcanic in origin generally, or occur in regions of high geologic diversity. And they may be a volcanic rock, they may be a rock that has marine sediments that are of interest to us, and you'll find in every part of the country there'll be interesting rock types. Some are more diverse than others. In the Northeast we have a tremendous amount of diversity for choosing rock dust, and we source many rocks in the Northeast. Out west the same thing. Generally in the mountain building regions we'll find those sorts of best rock dust. And we also gravitate towards some of the carbonaceous rock dust materials that are humic shales or black shales, and materials that will have some of the building blocks of life intact, that still have the carbon life forms still intact. And nearby here we have we'll go maybe visit a quarry later on today, and we'll show you some of these quarries that source these black shales or dark shales that have the carbon and nitrogen, sulfur compounds that are derived from life forms that were trapped in the rock.
All right, Tom, so I had a few more questions for you, actually a whole long list, but I mean, one of the biggest things that come up, I know a lot of you guys are already using the rock dust that have watched me, and because I believe in it and I know it works based on my experience that I've had with it, plus visiting other places that are using it, and your guys' testimonials. I mean, you guys that are using it know this stuff works and it does make a difference. But a lot of you guys, and the majority of you guys, are probably still not using the rock dust yet, and that makes me kind of sad, because I really want you guys to not only grow your food, but grow the highest quality food and have the easiest time at gardening. I mean, Tom is a working man, and they just spend minimal time on their garden, but yet it's still, you know, doing pretty good despite, you know, their minimum amount of effort they're putting into it, because they have healthy soil. And to me, rock dust is an essential part of building healthy soil. And so the question I get a lot, Tom, is, you know, I've never used rock dust. I use compost, manure, whatever, and everything's growing great. Why do I need the rock dust?
Generally, the rock dust is going to provide the macro and micronutrients, especially the trace minerals, which compost, unless it's made from mineral-rich feedstock, is not going to provide. So it's really the garbage in, garbage out syndrome. If you're going to remineralize your compost as it's being digested and apply that sort of compost, then you're going to get the full spectrum of nutrients. If you don't do that, you're really only growing with a limited alphabet, especially. I mean, you're not going to get the full spectrum of nutrients unless you have that sort of feedstock to begin with in your inputs. So that's really the main thing, is that these freshly crushed rock dust sources provide the broad spectrum of nutrients that are necessary for vital plant and biologic systems, which, you know, plants are basically complex biologic systems, as are human beings. So that's really the objective, and it's fairly simple. You apply broad spectrum pulverized rock, microbial populations in the form of compost or inoculants, a good carbon source, and you will ultimately end up with a self-regulating growing system in your garden without too much extra effort. As long as you have water and sunlight, you'll actually grow healthy plants for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And one of the things is, if you've always grown a certain way and you're doing it and it works great, that's great. And you know what the results are, but what if you add rock dust and things are better? I mean, the worst thing that's gonna happen, in Joshua Boogie Brew's famous last words, is you're gonna be fleeced by buying rock dust that doesn't do anything, but it does and will work. And it is an investment, you know, in your soil, making your soil healthier, plus an investment in your health, so that you and your family could have healthier food, because it is more nutritious, you know, by documented studies that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So, Tom, I wanted to ask you about the problem with, like, just using synthetic chemical fertilizers and like 10-10-10 fertilizer, as well as, you know, like major universities out there say that you only need like 16 to maybe 20 minerals. That's all the plant needs, right? And there's gardening methods, Mittleiter gardening method online, you know, for example, say your plants only need, you know, 16 to 20 minerals, and that all the other ones are a waste because your plants doesn't use them. Like, is there truth, or, you know, is this true, or what's the story on all this?
Well, to take your question in the order that they come, first of all, there's a distinct difference between, well, you mentioned 10-10, which we're talking about soluble NPK fertilizers. These are generally soluble sulfates or acid salts that are going to create a condition where the plant will need to uptake nutrients in solution, essentially. And there's a big problem with that, in that much of what you put out is going to be lost into the water system, into the groundwater, contamination of wells, into the ditches and lowlands, but produce algae blooms. There's a big effort right now to control phosphorus runoff. Nitrogen getting into water wells complicates respiratory systems in human beings by replacing oxygen, essentially, because nitrogen and oxygen are very similar, appear similar in the respiratory system. So that those are problems of actual function in the soil and in the plant. The other downside is when you apply soluble fertilizers in high doses, you're going to kill microbial populations. and you're also going to start losing carbon. It's well documented that the use of soluble fertilizers has caused a depletion of carbon in the soil from the topsoil. So instead of the carbon being sequestered or captured in the topsoil, these practices actually cause a depletion of carbon in the form of CO2 into the atmosphere and other volatile compounds. So there's a lot of downsides to it. You're also supporting the fossil fuel industry, which is a major producer of chemical fertilizers. Now, there are some growers that use both, that judiciously use soluble fertilizers and micronutrients in the form of rock dust and other inputs, and they're successful. So there's some middle ground there. We don't use soluble fertilizers. We don't use any nitrogen, soluble nitrogen here, and we have vigorous growth in our orchards and in our garden. So you can grow plants without the use of soluble fertilizers if you have minerals, carbon, and microbes.
Cool. So what about the, some plant biologists and all this and universities say you need 16 to 20 odd minerals, and that's all the plant needs. Like, is that true or is it not true, or what's your research uncover?
I think to some extent it's true that there are major elements that are necessary. They're acknowledging minor trace elements, but most of the agronomists now are starting to open their eyes to the need for trace elements such as boron, as an example. And boron will regulate pollination, the pollen function of plants. It'll regulate cell wall structure. For instance, they'll talk about nickel. No one's ever spoken about nickel in the past, about the need for nickel. And we're talking in traces. This is not a red flag for people who aren't worrying about heavy metals. This is the fact that human and plant biology relies on some of these nutrients and trace. Without them, your system won't work well. Cobalt, as an example, is another one. Chromium is another one. In addition to the majors, which are your phosphorus and the potassium, calcium and magnesium, and so on and so forth. So it's very important to acknowledge not only the role of the major nutrients, but also the roles of these trace elements, not only for plant health, but for the human body. I think that some of the decline in the health of the population, especially in the modern world, and I'm sure you can speak to this very well, is the lack of trace elements and trace nutrients and available nutrients in the food source. And that's one thing that we're trying to work to change at Rock Dust Local, and a bunch of the people who are growing biologically and organically using these mineral inputs are raising the nutrient density or nutrient content of the food. That in turn is going to create a healthier population. So we say healthcare starts in the farm. It starts on the farm and in your dirt. And I don't think there's really much dispute about that anymore in terms of the science.
Yeah, I mean, I saw this book that you have here. It's actually called Mental and Elemental Nutrients by Carl Pfeiffer, PhD, MD. And this actually, what does this book talk about? And how can this be beneficial for you guys if you guys are looking for more information on actually different trace minerals and the use in the body and some of the things that it can cause or not cause?
Yeah, this is actually a book written by Carl Pfeiffer, who passed away a while ago. This book was actually published in 1975. There have been other editions of it, but essentially he and his group in an institute called the Brain Biocenter in Princeton, New Jersey, pioneered the treatment of degenerative conditions such as schizophrenia and other neurological problems through the use of vitamin therapy and whole food therapies. And he did a lot of work that at the time the pharmaceutical companies didn't appreciate, and there was a lot of resistance to some of his findings. But Pfeiffer and others have long promoted the use of whole foods and vitamin therapy to treat a number of different diseases, and I think this is sort of speaks to the idea of creating a healthy condition in the soils for both plant and also animal feed. So that's something that we're working on to bring to the public, not only to professional growers, but also to avid gardeners and people who have potted plants and such on their balconies. Everybody has access to this if they just look hard enough, and they can come to our website, or some of our other partners make these available to people at very affordable prices now.
Great. So we've talked about, you know, the mineral connection with human health and how that could enhance, you know, your health. But what does it really do to the soil, and what does it do to the plants? You know, I mean, how are plants affected by adding these broad spectrum, you know, rock dust minerals? Like, what will happen?
Well, I'm going to read a little bit from, because, you know, I can't remember all of this stuff every day. Paul Storer, who is an agronomist, a long-time agronomist for a company called Australian Mineral Fertilizers in Australia, did a lot of research over the years, and he put down a list of things that some of these nutrients will affect in plants, and I'm just going to read it quickly. And nitrogen, most people have heard of nitrogen. Nitrogen affects the formation of amino acids, nucleic acids, so we're talking about DNA and RNA. If you don't have available nitrogen of the right form, you're not going to be able to synthesize proteins and chlorophyll, as an example. Sulfur, something that many agronomists don't talk about, but sulfur is needed for nucleic acids, protein acids, coenzymes, necessary for energy storage or structural integrity. These are cell walls. Phosphorus is considered a major nutrient. Phosphorus creates a sugar phosphates. It carries chemical energy in the form of ATP, creation of nucleic acids, coenzymes. Boron is something that we're hearing a little bit more about, and we look for rock dust that have boron. Some of our best rock dusts have appreciable amounts of boron. It complexes with mannitol and other constituents of cell walls. So we're talking about the actual structure of a cell, involved in pollen germination and pollen tube growth. So without boron, you're going to get poor pollination. Without pollination, you're going to get poor fruit set. Silicon, in the form of silica, deposited as silica in the plant cell walls. It's increasingly being seen as a vital nutrient. Improves cell wall structure and rigidity, strength, plant architecture. Potassium, K, which is shown as the letter K. It's a cofactor for over 40 enzymes, including soluble starches. Sodium, used by C4 plants, which are high carbon plants. Magnesium is a cofactor in many plant enzymes. Calcium, considered by many to be the kingpin of elements, a major constituent of cell walls, a second messenger in metabolic regulations, and cell permeability. Manganese is a cofactor for some enzymes required for photosynthesis and oxygen evolution. Chlorine regulates osmotic balance, which is pressure balance within cells, as a component of photosynthetic reaction. Iron, a cofactor of cytochromes, which has to do with electron transfer and proteins. Respiration, required for chlorophyll synthesis. Copper, cofactor of photosynthetic electron transfer. Again, we're talking about electron, the difference of cations and anion exchange. Respiratory electron transfer of proteins and other enzymes. Zinc is a vital element missing in many foods. Component of alcohol dehydrogenase, copper and zinc superoxides. Molybdenum, again, if you're missing molybdenum and traces, you will not be able to fix nitrogen from any source. Nickel is a plant enzyme cofactor. Nickel is required for iron absorption and seed germination. So without nickel in appreciable amounts, you will not be able to germinate your seeds. Nickel depletion is linked to necrosis of the leaves and stems, so that would be the yellowing of the leaves and the stems. Is lack of grain viability, so poor development of grains, depressed vigor in seedlings. And then there's many others that we aren't listed here. These would be the rare earth elements that are only now being seen to be vital in the formation of germination of plants, early growth, the ability of plants to breathe or take oxygen and CO2 out of the air and things like that. So these are the sorts of elements that are found in rock dust, the minerals, the broad spectrum rock dust, as well as in some of the crop synergists that we're putting out with the rock dust, the fulvic and humic acids, the flavonoids, which we're feeding to the top of the plant, and also when we water, when we irrigate or water our plants, we're putting out these cofactors which help synthesize or chelate the plant or assist in the plant's own chelation and assimilation of these vital nutrients.
Cool. Yeah, I want to definitely talk about that in just a little bit, but I want to get back to like kind of keeping it real for my gardener people out there, because I know a lot of you guys aren't super technical, and frankly I was getting a little bit technical, but I want you guys to remember this, like for me, my gardening style and what I teach for you guys is something that's really easy to do without having to like be the expert and know what specific trace mineral does what. So for example, like if a burglar was breaking into my house, I wouldn't have like a 9mm and shoot him right between the eyes to take him down. I'd have a shotgun and just blast a shotgun in the general direction and just splatter the shot everywhere, and I'm bound to hit him. And so that's my gardening approach. And with things like rock dust, you don't got to know how it all works. You just got to get some good rock dust and spread it down, and that's the end of the story. But it's sad that most people are still not doing that. And I know there's videos on YouTube that say, oh, rock dust doesn't work because there's this one guy did one study with a certain kind of rock. And Tom, why is it that sometimes rock dust just simply don't work? And I know there's more than one reason. All right, this is John Cola with growingyourgreens.com. Today we have another exciting episode for you. What I'm going to do today for you guys is the top 5 ways to save water in your container garden. Now, I always encourage you guys to like grow in raised beds, and that's what I do in the majority of